Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, colleagues, and most of all, the survivors. I am honored today as part of the 10th year anniversary of the Mandate on Sexual Violence and Conflict to facilitate this session on justice and accountability as key aspects of prevention. We have already heard much about justice today, throughout the day. There's been much talk, we know, but less in terms of actual cases. Among her 3 strategic priorities, the Special Representative Patton has prominently included the conversion of cultures of impunity into cultures of justice and accountability through consistent and effective prosecution. Member states have also recognized their obligation to fight impunity and to prosecute those responsible for conflict-related sexual violence. Yet, member states have also recognized, including in Security Council Resolution 2467, which was adopted earlier this year, that only very limited numbers of perpetrators of sexual violence have been brought to justice. And we'll hear more about that today. I am now humbled to give the floor to 2 survivors from Colombia and Guatemala, respectively, who have suffered unspeakable violations and have thereafter worked tirelessly and courageously in the pursuit of justice for victims of conflict-related sexual violence. First, I'll give the floor to Ms. Angela Maria Escobar. Ms. Escobar is a national coordinator of the Network of Women Victims and Professionals in Colombia. This organization was created by victims of sexual violence and is supported by women and men with the aim to promote the empowerment of women victims of sexual violence. She is a victim of sexual violence by the paramilitaries and is now a defender of women's rights. Ms. Escobar was a member of the victims delegation to the peace negotiations in Colombia and played a crucial role in ensuring the inclusion of provisions on accountability for sexual violence in the peace agreement. I give the floor now to Ms. Escobar.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. I would like to express my thanks to the Office of the SRSG on Sexual Violence and Armed Conflict for the invitation to participate in this event, which celebrates the beginning of her mandate and the achievements in the last 10 years. It's also an occasion to identify the challenges that we are trying to overcome to not only prevent this crime, but also, and above all, prevent wars. Because these wars, as an exercise of power, always lead to the worst practices of people, particularly men, who make up the majority of combatants. It's also a special day for victims, and we are a part of them as well. Because after all these years of meetings and work, we were able to establish a global fund for victims and survivors of sexual violence. That was an achievement that was possible following the leadership of Dr. Denis Mukwege and the Nadia Initiative. They both won the Nobel Peace Prize for their work and their commitment to defending the victims of these crimes. The creation of the Global Fund is a step forward for those of us who did not have access to justice nor reparation for the damage that sexual violence left for us on our bodies, our emotions, our lives, and our families and communities. Thank you to the United Nations and to the states that decided to support the Global Fund. With that fund, we will be able to continue to recognize this crime and, above all, recognize the importance of involving and ensuring the leadership of victims and survivors. For the members of our organization, reparations are fundamental. Human rights are crucial. And for these rights, we will continue to fight in our communities, in our countries, and globally. 10 years ago, the mandate of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict was established. The victims of sexual violence then started to become visible in international cooperation for our governments and even for human rights defenders' organizations, as well as for the United Nations system. There is no doubt that the role of that office has been key for the progress that we have made. For me, the most important progress was the empowerment of us, the victims, because now, and increasingly, we can come forward with our own proposals and be included in different spaces, including this one, the United Nations. In fact, this year, the Security Council adopted Resolution 2467, in which it recognized that it is necessary to focus on victims to achieve better results in programs to prevent and eradicate sexual violence during war and in times of peace in Colombia, so that victims can start to speak up. We are organizing ourselves to ensure that we are recognized as victims of armed conflict, to have access to justice. It was necessary that we ensure that sexual violence is not a cultural practice, but rather a criminal practice that is sanctioned. And we need to ensure that governments are on board with that, to explain that sexual violence not only persists, but is also increasing, at least in Colombia, by 9% in just the last year. In my country, every half hour, one child, one boy, girl, or woman is raped. It's true that to eradicate sexual violence in times of war and peace, we need to transform unequal relations and power relations between men and women. But it's also true that to achieve these change, we need to move from words to deeds. We need better living conditions, better education, and above all, we need to have access to justice. In my country, we need to allow victims to speak up, and many of us have done that. But what for? Impunity in cases of sexual violence is almost at 94%. Victims understand that there is no justice because this is a crime that above all affects girls and women. In the network of women victims and professionals, we have created a model for collective complaints with the support of the international community, particularly the British government. And with this model, since 2013 to date, we have managed to support 1,298 victims of sexual violence in armed conflict to complain before the authorities. None of those cases has led to a conviction. And this reflects the fact that our rights and our contribution to society continue to be undervalued. For this reason, discrimination and violence against girls and women persists. We want to change all of this with the peace process. Despite the achievement of the signing of the peace accords in November 2016, we cannot speak of peace or security if every year in my country around 20,000 people in my country report this crime. And here I want to note a great step forward, that is that the SRSG played an important role during the support of the Havana negotiations. Their support allowed us to make visible the fact that sexual violence is a terror offense, which allows for control of men over women, both in war and at home. It doesn't only go away with disarmament or demobilization. For this, therefore, victims came forward to the negotiating table, and we managed to include sexual violence as a standalone crime in the peace accords to ensure that perpetrators do not receive any benefits nor amnesties. Our peace agreement is the first one in the world that included sexual violence and a gender-based approach. So that this great step forward can have a true impact on our lives, we need to ensure that the special jurisdiction for peace opens cases and hears cases of sexual violence. Our victims have put forward 10 reports to this jurisdiction or court on more than 10,000 cases. We want transitional justice to show results by bringing the perpetrators to justice. Transitional justice is also an opportunity to propose measures that would guarantee non-repetition, and above all, we hope that this justice will guarantee us the right to holistic reparation, so that this progress becomes a real alternative for justice. We need to ensure that the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Sexual Violence technically supports the Technical and Accusations Unit, as well as the court rooms and chambers of the Special Tribunal for Peace. This support should also bear in mind the requests and contributions of the victims, as established in Resolution 2467 of the Security Council. Appropriate consideration of sexual violence in transitional justice would be an important step forward to bring an end to the use of sexual violence as a mechanism to maintain the subordination and humiliation of women and children. Victims, through our empowerment and leadership, have not only managed to face up to stigmatization and come and find other victims who can also see us as an example. We've also become defenders of the rights of women and children. However, as you know, defending peace, victims' rights, human rights, or simply being a community or social leader has always generated risks. Since the signing of the peace accords to date, more than 700 human rights defenders and leaders have been murdered. 98 of the victims were women. Despite that painful situation, I want to say that in my country, it's not the same, because now these murders have led to a level of national recognition and a general sense of understanding. That's not enough, though. The Colombian state need to make sufficient action to protect human rights defenders. The Security Council and the SRSG for sexual violence, in their role as a verifier of the implementation of the final agreement, can also play a very important role in this matter, including the voices of victims, and in particular the voices of the victims of sexual violence. Victims are well aware that we can count on you, and you can count on us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Escobar, for sharing with us your experience and your contributions to the Colombia peace negotiations and the agreement that resulted. Thank you. I'll turn next to our next survivor, Ms. Demetria Yat. Ms. Demetria Yat is from the indigenous Quechua community in Panzos, Alta Verapaz, Guatemala, and is also a victim survivor of sexual violence during the armed conflict in Guatemala. Ms. Yat is the president of the Jalok Yu Association, the Association of Abuelas, the grandmothers of Sepers Arco, and one of the civil complainants in the landmark case which led to the conviction of Guatemalan military officers for sexual violence, sexual slavery, and domestic slavery of indigenous women during the conflict in Guatemala. Ms. Yat has been a strong voice for the women in the Sepers Arco case and their communities, carrying a message of peace and justice and calling for compliance with the 16 measures of transformative reparations for sexual violence which were granted by the court in this case. Ms. Yat, you have the floor.
Nachin guachin banaklainin guayikin hunkamok sadikomonil banaklain di kanaremesayat aranikin jalset pursark.
Señoras y señores,
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm from Mesayat and I come from the Sepo Sako community.
Stelain nikin beresindikatos si kanachin lishek uluk railal.
Yo soy la
I led the organization or group of women from Sepo Sako.
Gitrahin kash kakuli railala in maka oras sa inanahkuan ko kwantra kakulup la aholi ishk.
somos sobrevivientes
We are the survivors of sexual violence in armed conflict. If we hadn't been organized at that time, we wouldn't be here today.
Anahkuan kwanchik kakulup tish banungit kunilik angel ho changiruna ilok li railash katyu amin sa likung chik alebal.
Hoy estoy
Today I'm here to set out the fact and raise the fact that as women we have rights, and it is the time to speak up and to reveal everything that we suffered in our communities.
Nakla oho shkatsil chakirish lakatyu am lakakwanhik ho changruna ilok li railash katyu amijak pas ho kanakashaki la eshlikech ishkilal.
nosotras
We suffered during the armed conflict, and today we are here to explain and allow you to understand the voice of other women.
Ishkulu lakakwankilal ho la oli ish nakwankakulu shishyebal chikunili railal karulit katyu ami salakak alebal hunhun.
nosotras las mujeres
We, as Indigenous women, also have rights. We must be able to express and explain to you everything that we experience within our communities. We are aware that we do have our rights.
Buki unta inak te kutung sali chakra ho nakchira bili awak behilal ho charula kamahilal salik alebal hunhun karup lishkuluk railal salik hunsut kunrup elchasha.
hemos trabajado
We have been working hard to speak up and ensure that our voice is heard by the authorities and the competent justice bodies.
Chiho kain te banumanglik angel mare kwani komonto mahina sik lirakle atin ho nashkasik la ho janak shiv tish sik balirakle atin banak tish shiv ut te sikish jalal changirunak te shramsa laqabe.
nosotras
We were afraid. However, it's important to seek justice and to seek change and to speak up and ensure our voices are heard.
La in ni ilrish li khuni li qakwanhik hok alo la angela nakwang la inam antoshire dios nak joko hulak chiruli chakra joko hulak sa kwankilal rukine di common.
yo agradezco
I would like to thank God and the institutions that have supported us, because we have been able to make headway in reparations in our lives.
Hok alo indi la kulul railal renak redik chijalak makotya jobam ilta chkhuni di bakwansh qatyu ami.
nosotras las
As victims of sexual violence, it's important for us that we speak up and explain all of the violations that we've suffered to our human rights.
Luk railal tento taranak te kwangsh kulup chbanun ki chkhuni dik angela in tento nak te sarak ik irut joget yu amin kil mukote shuak ta chik mukote ko shlak ta chik.
todas las que
All of us who were the victims of sexual violence, well, it's important for all of us to speak up, to seek justice, and to explain to the world everything that we suffered.
La ining achinikin ko shlak uting achinikin shuak chjeba li khoni mal khochina li shin ki ami banak relik chjali jokin chjeba chirudi chakra.
yo ya no tengo miedo
I'm no longer afraid, because what I'm saying is what I really experienced, what I really suffered during the conflict.
Renak jok chirap ingili awak behilal khok alep dia awak behilal kwanke sadi shpap angili chakra ingili tento tarah nak tashbanu chkhuni li khoni ma khochina li shqalqa mahilal lao.
es importante
It's important that both the government and authorities are aware that we are organized and we know what happened to us.
Think ahane ma shpanu re pur tento sa shpene shpanu ingili shkan hele banak Hanchi dish chakra mingile kwan ganah kwan utentonak teshbano dish rabal ruchich hunsut hunrup eshtosha.
Es importante
It's also important to say that it is not the current authorities who did us harm, but it is important to call on them to reflect, to ensure that they can deliver on the measures that we're asking for.
Hunsutak lich akila holish katyu amila obas rukine di kalal kak ahol utrukine li qiqamam.
nosotras las mujeres.
We as women don't want history to repeat itself. It's important to advance so that our children and grandchildren never suffer these situations again.
Utnam antiosheh gire de unu mujer nak kwankina ya nak kwanjish manugelik angel manak gitrahin kash qasik shalal chankirunat qashaqabat qliqak angel pas maremak ain raksa ina nakwa.
Agradezco
I thank UN Women for their support to me and for making it possible for me to be here with you today.
Unak ta teqesh kwankilal chunilik angela in qinkata kanak chumak ashjalal.
es importante
It's important that we continue to make progress so that everything that we suffered doesn't happen again.
Qilah ki choqep biredi komon hokalep dit jokoch kots alkilik angela in mak achete shua mak achete koslaq tishte balchkhuni li raila li chaqila duk inet li sakhila li saqtelom hoka inak kanak li chaqra biling achete koslaq tishte balchuru li chaqra.
animo a todas las
We encourage all survivors to continue to progress and to speak up about their stories so that this never again happens with future generations.
Naktak angelak chkhuni la in renak takwang li tuqtu kilal chkhuni li khunrup elchashad sal chaqra khunkhun.
debemos
We must work for peace and justice.
Wanak kahkya indi shin chola kahkya indi shin te man josh kahkya inside chola hil chokere.
muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very moved by this, and that's everything that I can say to you right now.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yat, and for sharing with us your experience and your words of wisdom for other survivors to speak up. That's very important. I will now turn to three practitioners representing three very different organizations, but all sharing the goal of ensuring that perpetrators of conflict-related sexual violence are held accountable through national and/or international mechanisms. You will hear from them about their respective efforts to advance justice for victims of conflict-related sexual violence, but also about their immense political, technical, and operational challenges that they face and the support that they require in this regard to make prosecutions the norm rather than the exception. I will first introduce Ms. Michelle Jarvis, the Deputy Head of the International, Impartial, and Independent Mechanism for Syria, or the IIIM.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you, SRSG Passion, for the opportunity to be a part of the discussion with this important event today. 10 years of the SRSG's mandate, I think it is a really important opportunity for all of us who are working to address this issue to renew our commitment to accountability for these crimes. With the ultimate goal being prevention, of course, we see accountability for conflict-related sexual violence as a crime in its own right being an essential precondition for the non-recurrence of this type of violence. And as criminal justice practitioners working on these issues, I think we are very conscious how high the stakes are for those most affected. The historical silences surrounding this issue have been broken by the courageous victims who have been willing to come forward over the years to tell their stories and to put the blame on the perpetrators, where of course it belongs. So it is a very serious responsibility that we have as criminal justice actors to critically reflect on what we do and to find ways to keep strengthening our own approaches on the accountability question. And I think there really is scope for us as practitioners to make sure we collaborate better globally by sharing our insights, good practices and lessons learned, and that we really find ways to overcome the obstacles that are presented by our differences in language, in culture and in jurisdictional frameworks. As a prosecutor at the Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal for many, many years, I was very conscious of the opportunity that the tribunal had to contribute to this process of global best practice sharing. The tribunal was one of the first institutions to grapple with the challenge of accountability for conflict-related sexual violence. And as you can imagine, many important lessons were learned over the 25 years of its work. As the end of the tribunal approached, we realised we had a closing window of opportunity to pull this experience together into a practical resource that we could make available for other prosecutors in the future to inform their work on a daily basis, so that we could keep pushing forward with stronger approaches to accountability. This ultimately resulted in a 500-page book, which is publicly available and is today being used by many actors working on conflict-related sexual violence, including prosecutors in national war crimes units around the world, by military actors and also UN actors, including the SRSG's office, our colleagues at UN Women, who have all been strong supporters of this project and the resource that we produced. So it's against this backdrop that I moved to the IIIM's mandate, the new mechanism that has been set up on Syria, and the efforts that we are making to adopt a stronger strategy for addressing conflict-related sexual violence in Syria. The mechanism was created by the General Assembly in 2016. It's a novel mandate. We've not seen a framework like this before for an accountability mechanism. It's not a court or tribunal, but we are mandated to carry out essential preparatory work to support accountability for Syria in the short and the long term. So this includes, of course, collecting and preserving the crucial evidence of crimes that have been committed, including conflict-related sexual violence, building criminal law case files, and supporting the work in the short term of the national war crimes units who are already working to establish accountability for crimes committed in Syria. The mechanism's terms of reference importantly show a real commitment to learning lessons from the past when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence. So we see an emphasis on the importance of effective strategies on sexual and gender-based violence specifically. And there is also a really important reference to the need for the head of the mechanism and the deputy head to have a demonstrated commitment to ensuring gender equality. Important and groundbreaking language in the mandate of an accountability mechanism, and a precedent that we should definitely be looking to in the future as well. So at the IIIM, we are taking very seriously these directions in terms of sexual violence and gender perspectives. And I wanted to just touch on 4 things today in the limited time available. So first of all, we are recognising that effective approaches to sexual and gender-based violence depend on having an institutional environment that is conducive to that goal. So we know that we will never make effective progress on accountability if we have an office environment that's marked by negativity on gender or gender-based harassment and discrimination. Second, we've adopted a strategy of integrating a focus on sexual and gender-based violence as a core part of our work and not viewing these crimes as separate and apart from the rest of what we do. So some of the concrete steps include putting in place an office-wide network of experts on sexual and gender-based violence across our key professional categories: investigators, analysts, lawyers, evidence management officers. It's really important that the expertise extends across the whole office framework. We are working hard to contextualise sexual violence in the cases that we build. And this is a key insight from past lessons where we have really seen much better successes when we're able to present a complete account of the victim's experience that links sexual violence with the other things that they experienced during the conflict. It's perhaps tempting to assume that it's a good thing to separate sexual violence out in our investigations and prosecutions. But the reality is that these crimes are typically committed amidst a range of other types of harms, and we don't serve victims or accountability by isolating them out from the broader context. Third, we are incorporating into our strategies the many lessons learned about how we can establish accountability for physical perpetrators, but also more senior officials who direct, encourage, and condone sexual violence. As we heard directly from survivors throughout the course of the day, for them it is very important that we hold both physical perpetrators and their superiors accountable. And we now have the benefit of a great deal of useful experience and important precedents about what strategies work the best for this. And fourth, recognising our unique mandate at the IIIM, we're undertaking a pilot project focusing on sexual and gender-based violence specifically in the context of Syria. So the first phase has indeed been a collaborative engagement with Syrian NGOs to build a detailed understanding, contextual understanding of sexual violence in the Syrian context to inform our work. Secondly, we're prioritising the collection and analysis of materials already collected by others relating to sexual and gender-based violence so that we can map what has already been done, where the gaps are, and what suggestions we can make to our interlocutors to strengthen our combined work in the future. Importantly, this also involves prioritising statements from female witnesses who are, in general, significantly underrepresented in much of the documentation work done to date. And the third component of our strategy is development of specific strategies for sexual violence as part of our case file building, and in particular, strengthening strategies for reflecting the role that gender plays in driving violence as a step towards a more transformative approach to the justice process. So in conclusion, we have learned how important it is for us to see accountability work as part of a broader process involving many stakeholders and particularly local ones. Looking back after 25 years of the experience of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we see clearly that no matter how effective we are in securing convictions, we will not affect broader transformational change if our successes in the courtroom are not translated into knowledge and understanding at the grassroots level, and particularly for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm particularly proud to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Ahmedou Bal. Maitre Bal has been the senior judicial expert of the UN team of experts on rule of law and sexual violence and conflict in Guinea. Maitre Bal, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup et bonsoir.
Thank you very much and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ahmedou Bal. I'm an international expert and I've been in Guinea since December 2012 in the team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict. I had the honor to work under the mandate of Ms. Zina Bangura, and I'm currently working under the mandate of Ms. Pramila Patten. And I would right at the outset to frame what I'm going to say, because I don't have a lot of time. I'd like to start by saying that the treatment of the 28th of December dossier, in which there were at least 29 cases of rape, at least 100 murders, as well as cases of pillages, sexual slavery, all sorts of things that you couldn't even imagine, all sorts of abominations committed against women, but also against the poor people who were there and who were simply peacefully demonstrating to avoid a person running in the elections. You need to know that the treatment of this case results from a joint communique from the Department of the Secretary General of the SRSG. This joint communique is the basis of the way that this work is done. That should be made very clear. Even though the CPI was involved in this, It's based, nevertheless, on this joint communique because it was necessary for, in this communique, Guinea to commit to waging a war against impunity, to compensating victims, and to satisfy the requirements of civil society and Guinean society and also the international community. So Guinea committed to do this while the United Nations committed to help it in this. And the Department of the Office of the SRSG on Sexual Violence and the Rule of Law and Sexual Violence committed to help with these objectives. So it was really a contract as far as I see it. And it was through this contract that we had that the work of the SRSG's mandate, or rather the work of the two SRSGs, respectively, because as I said, I worked under the mandate of Ms. Bangura and I now work under the mandate of Ms. Patton. It was this offer on the part of the OSRSG that is of interest to us as we celebrate this 10th anniversary. What I'm going to do is going to put the work of the department, the office, into practice on the ground. On the ground, first of all, the conditions needed to be put in place so that Guinea could comply with its commitment to combat impunity. To do that, it needed to be given the resources, the means to do that, because Guinea didn't have the resources to do that. You might expect the criminal court to be immediately able to do that, but no, there was an agreement on that basis and a very unusual situation after which Guinea committed to carry out reforms to get it up to the level that was necessary to be able to judge those cases in the criminal court. So the team of experts that I was deployed with, also in order to meet the requirements of the Office of the Secretary General Special Representative, I was responsible for training the magistrates that had been appointed by the government of Guinea and to ensure that they could carry out a proper investigation. Now, I don't have time to tell you the details of that, but at the very least, over the several years that I was deployed there, I was deployed in December 2012, we're now almost 7 years that I've been there. So we wanted to give the judges a helping hand first of all, and then provide a helping hand in judicial reform. And at each and every stage, that team of experts was there to provide that support. And I also don't want to forget by saying that what we had to do initially was just to bring in computers and office materials, because the judges, the magistrates that we found, couldn't even often have access to a piece of paper to write the judgment on. So that's just to give you an idea of where we started from, and then we articulated the reforms. We found ourselves in a country where the status of the judiciary and judges did not actually apply. The career of judges was managed by the civil service. So the team of experts through me needed to provide the necessary assistance to the judicial authorities, notably the Ministry of Justice and the various different hubs of that reform, so that we could at the very least get us to a point at which the circumstances would be conducive to this. Now, that involved also working with the judges that I was responsible for so that we could carry out the investigations into what happened on the 28th of December. We managed to at least close the receipt of information in 2017, but it was a long process, but we did get there. Following this, we needed to go to the next stage and get the case to the judge looking at the substance of the case so that a judgment could be reached. We reached a point at which we were told that at least 15 primary defendants could lose 500 victims' hearings, during which the victims of sexual violence and all the sorts of crimes that you could imagine would be heard, so that the victims' testimonies, above all the victims of sexual violence, could be heard and could be substantive, because we were in a country where there was a cultural weight that covers up a great many things. We got to that point, and then we ratcheted up a gear, I suggested that we establish a steering committee to organise the trials. That principle was accepted, but in order for that to become a reality, Ms. Patton had to come to Conakry herself to bang her fist on the table and demand the establishment of that steering committee. She did that, and the following day, the decree on that subject was issued. So, just to tell you a little bit about the mandate of these exceptional women, we also need to bear witness with our own eyes to what they do on the ground. And that's not the only thing. I have witnessed tugs of war between these SRSGs and heads of state when they were saying that there needed to be permanent and constant political will. Political will can't just be a slogan. It needs to be something that is put into practice on the ground. And every time that was an issue, I saw the two SRSGs come to Conakry and through a particularly onerous procedure, tell the authorities that they needed to be consistent and permanent in their commitment to this subject. In addition to the institutional judicial aspects that we've worked on, Ms. Patton also did another extraordinary thing. Ms. Bensouda also initiated something as she was leaving office. That is to say, the treatment of some 30 women with medical certificates, because of course these cases dated back to 2009. We were in 2017 at this point, but in spite of all of that, Dr. Mukuje did extraordinary work providing these consolidated medical certificates that allowed us to look back on some of these aspects and retrace the abuse that was committed against these women. Later on, she also put in place a mechanism that allowed for psychological support for the victims. Even better than that, healthcare providers were trained as part of this hub mechanism with the Mukwege Foundation so that they could not only acquire greater competence and skill when it comes to treating and examining these women, but also provide psychological support. At this level, again, at this stage, a consultant in psychological therapy who's in the room was subsequently sent into the field. Well, I'm being told that I don't have much time left, so I'll squeeze what I have to say even more. I just want to tell you how far we've come. The point we've reached, we may be satisfied with the progress that we've made, but there are still things in the shadows that we need to cast light on. Ms. Patton said in a recent statement that we take note of the fact that Guinea wants to judge its sons. We even take note of the statement by the Prime Minister saying that we are going to have trials for everyone, including senior military officials, but we will wait until we've actually seen it happen on the ground, and will continue to be skeptical until we see that happen. We are waiting for all the provisions to be taken so that the victims can at long last get what they have been trying to get for 10 years. Next, or rather last, so that people don't worry too much, we are asked for this compensation fund, the global fund that we mentioned earlier, that we spoke about earlier, for that to become a reality, because we're the people asking for it. In the steering committee I mentioned earlier, they're trying to set up a compensation fund for victims. So you can see, obviously, that we have an interest in this in several different areas. And so we call on donors to make that effort. Perhaps I would simply conclude by making an appeal to the international community, first of all, to support what our representatives are doing. They can't act alone without the international community. But we're also asking Guinea's bilateral partners and multilateral partners to tell Guinea the truth and to not always be happy with diplomatic language, to tell them that you need to make sure that the trial be opened immediately. And I would like to tell you a piece of news that we got yesterday, and we want this to actually happen. Yesterday, the Minister of Justice declared that the trial would take place at the latest at the end of June 2020. There was another speech immediately after that saying that perhaps it would even take place in January or February. We'll cross our fingers, and we hope that we will be able to see that happen. But in the meantime, we're going to keep our eyes fixed on the ground to see what happens. Thank you. I didn't scratch the surface of what I wanted to say, but there are time limits, and so I shall submit to everyone else's discipline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maitre Bal. Our last speaker on this panel will communicate by video message. That is Ms. Fatou Bensouda, who is the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. She will speak to us about the efforts of the ICC in terms of accountability for conflict-related sexual violence.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a distinct pleasure and honor to address this esteemed audience at this important commemoration. I deeply regret not being with you in person to celebrate this milestone and to contribute to the ongoing rich discussions with a view to identify lasting solutions to address the scourge of sexual and gender-based violence in conflict. I hope that nonetheless you accept my warmest greetings from The Hague, along with my sincere gratitude to Special Representative Pramila Patten and other co-organizers for putting together this seminal event. Allow me at the outset to express my personal admiration and respect for SRSG Patten, her predecessors, some of whom are present here today, and of course, the hardworking staff of her office, and indeed, the many champions at the forefront of this common struggle, participating at this event and beyond, for their crucial work around the globe. I consider the UN mandate on sexual violence in conflict a key cornerstone of the global structure and response to sexual violence in conflict. And along with my office, we feel privileged to consider SRSG Patten and her office a natural partner in the advancement of our joint goals of curbing the scourge of these appalling crimes. As prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, I regularly witness the devastating consequences of sexual and gender-based crimes on victims and affected communities. In the courage and dignity of victims and survivors, I have seen human nature at its best. And in the sheer brutality of crimes against them, I have seen it at its very worst. Sexual and gender-based violence is sadly characteristics of so many conflicts. It is too often perpetrated as a deliberate weapon of war or repression against women, men, girls, and boys. It is used despicably in the machination of ethnic cleansing. This must stop. But we must be realistic. No one single person, no one single entity, no one institution, and no one country can hope to achieve real success and progress alone. And this is my key message today, a call for collective action, all in our respective capacities, in a coordinated and complementary fashion to counter the horror of sexual and gender-based crimes. I want to take this opportunity to salute the courageous survivors present at the conference who have shared with us their harrowing stories. Despite their ordeals, they have shown profound inner strength. Their shared resolve to be heard, to move forward, gives us all inspiration. It is my firm belief that justice has a vital role to play in both deterring and punishing sexual and gender-based crimes in times of conflict. Sexual and gender-based crimes are explicitly and extensively prescribed in the founding treaty of the International Criminal Court, the Rome Statute. Upon taking office as ICC prosecutor, one of my primary goals was to ensure that the protection of the law is employed to the fullest extent, to foster a culture of accountability where sexual violence is no longer tolerated without consequence. We still have much work to do towards this aim. In 2014, I launched a comprehensive policy paper on sexual and gender-based crimes. The policy guides my office's investigations and prosecutions of these crimes. I have made our work in this area a strategic priority, and this policy is being implemented in all relevant aspects of my office's work. In many of the situations of which we are seized, from Myanmar in the context of the alleged deportation of the Rohingya, to Guinea, Nigeria, and Ukraine, or in our formal investigations in the Central African Republic or the Democratic Republic of Congo, to name only a few, we are confronted with the pervasiveness of sexual and gender-based crimes. We try to gather the necessary evidence to build cases that are reflective of the nature of these crimes with a view to holding the perpetrators to account. In July of this year, for instance, trial judges of the ICC unanimously convicted Mr. Bosco Ntaganda on all charges my office brought against him, including rape and sexual slavery committed against child soldiers within his own armed group in the DRC. In doing so, the ICC pushed the envelope of the law to bring added protection to children from the plight of sexual violence. Ensuring such tangible results in court is my office's job and main contribution. It is nevertheless not an easy task. Challenges can come in different forms, however, but they will not and should not deter us from doing what is necessary. For me and my office, survivor stories, each and every word, strengthen our resolve to fight against impunity, no matter how formidable the challenges or how powerful the perpetrators. The ICC is, of course, not a panacea. The investigation and prosecution of these crimes at the national level in particular is crucial. My office stands ready to assist and continue to collaborate with national jurisdictions and international actors to incentivize such work at the national level in a complementary fashion. Specific and concrete collaboration has notably taken place on a regular basis between my office and the Office of the Special Representative. This includes the UN team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict. This collaboration has aimed to encourage national investigation and prosecution of alleged sexual crimes, notably in Guinea and Nigeria. But civil society and non-governmental organizations also play a critical, multifaceted role, from raising awareness to focusing and keeping the attention of key actors on this important issue to ensure responsibilities are met, or, as first responders, to report on situations on the ground and to document alleged crimes where appropriate. Ours must be an age where we finally ensure that sexual and gender-based crimes will no longer be tolerated, and that we will relentlessly pursue those who tear violently at the social fabric of society through such egregious crimes. I thank you for your attention.